So you have seen on the continent a lot of farmer protests, and particularly a lot of these farmer protests are complaining about Ukrainian grain. Oh, it's all this Ukrainian grain that's, quote, flooding the market and distorting our prices. Here's the thing, you look at where the Ukrainians are actually selling their grain and corn, it ain't in Europe. It's not in Europe. Their primary customers are Turkey, Egypt, and I can't remember what the third one is now, but it ain't Europe. It ain't Europe at all. But as we said about Poland very recently, when the Peace and Justice Party were in trouble, they turned to the farmers to try and hopefully maybe keep them in power. That failed, but they have still kept that up, trying to sort of foment these farmers now to turn against Ukraine. Not only that, there's a lot of information that they may be being fed Russian disinformation to complain about, that Ukrainians are undercutting them, that your own country is undercutting your own, precious, farm and homeland to, benefit the Ukrainians. There's a lot of stuff going on, and I think when it comes to talking about this sort of grain issue, turns out, from what we can see now, and we'll be having a look at this in a bit, it's not Ukrainian grain that these farmers are in particular complaining about. It's actually Russian grain. Because one of the things that we did mention right back at the start of this, when all this all kicked off about 2 years ago, a lot of people were pointing out that this is the world's largest grain producer invading the fifth largest grain producer. And more importantly, the areas and the land that Russia would want to take are some of Ukraine's best farmland. So not only would this catapult Russia from being the world's biggest grain producer, they become the biggest grain producer. And that then would make Russia a significant, have significant power on a lot of other countries to be able to dictate other things that they would like. We've seen Russia do this with oil and gas in Europe, even to Poland. What do you think Russia would act like if they had pretty much a monopoly on the world's production of grain? Because I don't see Vladimir Putin handing out, grain to African countries for free unless he's going to get something in return. Most of it would be certainly resources, certainly as we've seen probably deployment of more Wagner forces, or the Africa Corps as they are now called, into Africa to help prop up and stabilize sort of dictatorships that are going on in Africa. Yeah, a lot of this isn't very good, but I want to turn to this that I saw today in the Kiev Independent, because I think it explains a lot more what's going on about this grain issue, especially in relation to the Lithuanian farmers. They're actually complaining about Russian, not Ukrainian grain, but they are being told by right-wing sources that, oh, no, that's not Russian grain, that's Ukrainian grain. So before we do get more into this, please do remember to click the like, click the share button. Down below, there's the subscribe button if you are new to the channel. There's the Patreon page if you'd like to support the channel that way. There's the YouTube thank you button called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. There's the Pony Club as well down below. So, as always, thank you very much to everyone who does help and support the channel. So, let's go over to the Kiev Independent to have a look at this. So, with the title of Lithuanian Farmers Complain About Russian, Not Ukrainian Grain. So, Lithuanian farmers say that it is an influx of Russian grain, not Ukrainian crops, that now presents a problem for the EU markets. The Lithuanian National Radio reported on the 5th of March, saying that their colleagues from Poland launched protests against Ukrainian agricultural products and the EU's Green Deal earlier back in February, blocking over 6 border crossings with Ukraine. The Polish agricultural workers have been complaining that cheaper products from Ukraine are now pushing down the prices and have created an unfair competition since the EU instituted a free trade regime with Kiev back in 2022 to alleviate its economy amid the war with Russia. Since the 1st of March, Polish farmers have also been particularly blockading the former Karljawa Blusko checkpoint. I don't know how you say that, but I think that might be close, hopefully, on the border with Lithuania. Now, allegedly due to fears that Ukrainian grain is now entering Poland via the Baltic country. Ukrainian's Prime Minister Minister Denis Shmyhal denied the claims during a press conference on the 4th of March, stressing that Ukrainian products like grain or corn are prohibited to be sold in Poland, do not enter the Polish market. So this is it. This is it. If they are, this is what's insane about this, that they are now, as you can see here, blocking a border that isn't on line with Poland. They're blocking one with Lithuania because they're being told by far right people, by again Russia disinformation and propagandists, that Ukrainian grain is somehow circulating all the way around into the Black Sea, into Lithuania, and then back in to the to be sold secretly in the Polish market. But there you go. So, according to Lithuanian farmers, the grain from Russia now enters the EU in huge quantities and presents a much more serious problem. There are massive, impressive figures, with over 3 million tons of Russian grain having passed through Latvia and Lithuania combined in just 2023, says Arius Majakis, Majukas, the head of the Lithuanian Association of Grain Growers. The Eurostat data does show that EU imports of Russian grain went from 97,000 metric tons in 2022 to more than 1.5 in 2023. So, Majakis has also claimed that the Russian grain is driving down prices across the European bloc in a very deliberate move by Moscow to destabilize the markets. So, they are now, as you can see, trying to wage economic warfare of their own by trying to destabilize European markets with this grain, by purposefully just dumping as much grain as they can onto the European market in a hope that this can destabilize farmers, which we are seeing now. So when these farmers sort of go and protest and cause trouble and complain about quote Ukrainian grain, it's not Ukrainian grain they claim about, it's Russian grain, and Russia trying to destabilize European markets. And this is something we've got to watch out for, of Russia trying to do this again in the future. Because, as we said at the beginning, if Russia succeeds and takes that territory from Ukraine, they are the world's largest producer of grain. So imagine that they are now going, well, we're going to dump this much grain into the European markets to destabilize it. We can already see the effect it is having on farmers. What's to say they don't then scale this back drastically and say, well, we're not going to sell as much grain to you in the future. Now, of course, that would then mean that, European farmers, great, but what happens then, as in the case we've had in the UK for the past couple of years, very, very wet summers, which have destroyed the UK's grain production supply. What if you then get, something like that happens? There's all sorts of ways Russia can try and do this, and we must be prepared for them to do things like this. And I think it's really, really unfortunate that we aren't paying attention to something like this that Russia is trying to use to destabilize Europe and, again, blame it on the Ukrainians. So anyway, it continues. So there is regulation that does allow the EU to intervene in a market in emergency situations and start buying food products on prices from which are now falling drastically. In this case, it could buy Ukrainian grain on the territory of Ukraine, thus to try and stabilize the market, he said. But Latvia has now declined to temporarily ban imports of grain and other foodstuff from Russia and Belarus in February, making the first EU country to take this measure. So, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk also said on the 4th of March that Warsaw does plan to ask Brussels to impose sanctions on Russian and Belarusian agricultural products and foodstuffs. So, that is good that they are now sort of cottoning onto this, but it might be too little too late, unfortunately, in this regard. Um, but if Putin is willing to do this to destabilize markets here, who's not to say he might do this in other areas? Because one group of countries and a continent in particular that has really been suffering because of the blockage of the Black Sea and Ukraine not being able to use the Black Sea ports to get the grain out of the country anymore is that grain would normally go to a lot of African countries. And then it's what does Putin then start to use that leverage he then has against those countries? What can he then start to do against them? And then who knows what other kinds of trouble he could cause, not only potentially in Africa, but in other regions as well, given that much leverage he has over, that massive, grain pile he's now sitting on. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please let me know what you think in the comments down below. And of course, do remember to click on the like and share button on your way out. And of course, other ways to help support the channel are down below as well. So until next time, we'll see you all very soon.